You trust, you give your best, you're fully present, and yet you are betrayed again. What makes people close to you cross that line? What lies behind betrayal when it comes from the one you least expect? In this video, we explore an uncomfortable yet liberating truth. Betrayal rarely happens by chance. Carl Jung shows us that human bonds are stitched together by unconscious forces, projections, shadows, and unrecognized patterns. When these forces clash, the other person might betray you not only out of weakness, but because they are being driven by something they don't even understand. This video isn't about justifying betrayal, but about uncovering it. Knowing why it happens changes everything and sets you free. Comment below, I deserve genuine relationships. Then, dive into this journey of revelation. From Carl Jung's perspective, human relationships are deeply shaped by the unconscious. When someone betrays us, we often look for rational explanations: lack of character, selfishness, cowardice. While these answers may seem logical, Jung proposes something deeper: the idea that betrayal often springs from inner psychic conflicts within the betrayer. In other words, the betrayal says more about them than it does about you. Every person carries repressed feelings, unacknowledged desires, insecurities, ambitions, and unresolved wounds. Jung called this collection of unconscious elements the shadow. When someone doesn't confront their shadow, they inevitably project it onto someone close. Often this projection leads to idealization, but over time, that idealized image becomes a repository for the other's frustrations. That's when the impulse to destroy or betray arises. There's also the conflict with internal archetypes. For instance, an individual who rejects their own feminine anima or masculine animus side may feel threatened by someone who emotionally awakens them. The result: escape, rupture, betrayal. Another crucial point is that betrayal might be an unconscious attempt to break a bond that exposes too much, a bond that forces the other to confront parts of themselves they're not ready to face. You aren't betrayed because you're weak. Often you're betrayed because your presence shines light on areas the other would rather keep in darkness. Understanding this doesn't lessen the pain, but it returns your power. It makes it clear, you did not cause the betrayal, yet you can choose never to accept relationships where it repeats. Few things are as confusing as being betrayed by someone we trust. Sometimes that person seemed stable, affectionate, present. Other times, they appeared fragile, yet committed. And then, betrayal happens. Your mind searches for answers. Was it coldness, malice, lack of love? But in Carl Jung's psychology, the reasons behind betrayal go far beyond what's visible on the surface. Jung referred to the hidden part of our personality, the part we hide, reject, or pretend not to feel, as the shadow. Desires, impulses, fears, frustrations. When this shadow remains unrecognized, it begins to act in disguise. The person believes they are in control, but it is actually this unconscious side making the decisions. In this context, betrayal isn't coldly premeditated. It emerges as an escape, a misunderstood impulse, often followed by regret. It's as if the betrayer is surprised by their own act. This kind of betrayal happens when someone is in conflict with what the other awakens in them. Often the betrayed is someone who represents an emotional challenge, revealing what the other avoids facing, like their insecurities, need for control, or difficulty being authentic. Instead of dealing with this, the betrayer chooses to run away, and unfortunately, that flight takes the form of betrayal. There's also a subtler yet real aspect related to sexuality. People who have had many sexual partners throughout life sometimes develop a certain resistance to deep involvement. This isn't a rule, but it's a pattern observed both in psychology and human behavior studies. After experiencing many variations, a person becomes accustomed to novelty. Over time, staying in a stable relationship might seem monotonous, even when there's love and respect. It's as if the brain, conditioned to change, starts seeking new experiences almost automatically. This behavior doesn't mean that the person is incapable of love, but it may indicate greater difficulty in committing when the phase of passion fades and the reality of living together sets in. This is even more evident when the shadow hasn't been addressed. The impulse for novelty can serve as an escape from true intimacy, which requires vulnerability, patience, and self-responsibility. The shadow also comes into play when someone feels inferior in a relationship. If they admire you but can't handle that feeling, an unconscious impulse to bring you down may emerge. In this case, betrayal becomes a way to restore balance within themselves. not because you did something wrong, but because they couldn't bear their own sense of emotional inferiority. Then there's self-abandonment. Many people betray because before that, they had already betrayed themselves. They had already denied their own values and were living something they no longer believed in internally. The external infidelity simply reveals an internal breakdown that had been brewing for a long time. Lacking clarity, they choose secrecy over facing difficult conversations and decisions. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, even something as absurd as that, to avoid facing their own soul." In many cases, betrayal is precisely that, an unconscious attempt to flee from oneself. The problem is, in that escape, someone gets hurt, you get hurt. Understanding the betrayer's shadow isn't about forgiving the mistake or staying in harmful relationships. It's about seeing clearly. Not all betrayal is rational. Many betrayals are the result of a fragmented, disorganized, unresolved psyche. And the more aware you are of this, the less likely you are to trust someone who still lives on autopilot, guided by their unconscious. When we get involved with someone, we don't always see them as they really are. Often, we see in them what we desire, need, or lack. In Jungian psychology, this phenomenon is called projection. Simply put, we project our own qualities, dreams, fears, and wounds onto the other without realizing it. At the beginning of a relationship, this projection can create an intense enchantment. It's the famous love at first sight, when the other seems perfect, the ideal match. But when reality sets in, and the person fails to meet that idealized image, frustration follows, and often with it, the impulse to betray. Idealization is one of the most dangerous forms of emotional disconnection. When we idealize someone, we place an unfair burden on them. We expect perfection, complete understanding, constant reciprocity. No relationship can support that level of expectation. And when reality, with its flaws, differences, and limitations comes in, admiration can turn into disappointment. That's when many people betray, not because the other has truly failed, but because the image in their mind has crumbled. Carl Jung said, "What you deny in yourself will appear in your life as something else." That's exactly what happens in relationships built on projections. The betrayer is often trying to find in someone new what was lost in the old relationship, not because the old is gone, but because they never truly saw what was there. They fell in love with a fantasy, and now they're seeking another. The problem is that every new relationship begins with a new projection, and the cycle repeats. In this context, betrayal isn't just a search for novelty, it's an unconscious attempt to keep an illusion alive. The illusion that there is someone out there who can fill all the parts you refuse to work on within yourself. This can happen in any type of relationship, romantic, friendship, even family ties. We expect the other to give us something that is really our responsibility to develop. And when they can't meet that expectation, we feel betrayed, or we betray them. Another important point, when someone idealizes you too much, it can also be dangerous. They start to see you as a solution to their own emptiness, and when they realize you aren't that, when you show flaws, limits, and contradictions, they may respond with coldness, distance, or betrayal. The paradox is cruel. The same image that once brought you closer now becomes a reason to reject you. That's because projection isn't real love, it's an illusion shaped by the unconscious. Jung also talked about the process of individuation, the path to becoming whole, authentic, and aware. In this process, we learn to recognize our projections and stop imposing them on others. We begin to see people as they are, not as we wish they would be. And by doing so, our relationships become more mature and genuine. The problem is that many avoid this process because it requires looking inward, confronting one's own shadow, and letting go of the fantasies of completeness. People who frequently betray tend to be stuck in an immature level of relating. They don't connect with the real person, but with the idea they have of them. When that idea cracks, they look for another, and the cycle starts anew. They aren't just betraying you, they're betraying themselves and the process of growth that they refuse to live. Understanding these projections is not only about comprehending why someone betrays, but also about protecting ourselves. When we recognize that we're being idealized, we can set boundaries. When we notice our own projections, we can step back and reflect. This shift moves us away from fantasy and closer to reality. And reality, as imperfect as it is the only solid ground where genuine relationships can form. Betrayal fueled by projection is like an escape from reality, and as long as there is escape, the cycle will repeat. But when there is awareness, there is choice. And conscious choice always steers us away from unnecessary pain. The pain of betrayal makes us scrutinize the other. Why did they do this? How could they? When did it all go wrong? These are legitimate human questions. Yet at some point, an even more powerful question arises. Why do I keep connecting with people who betray me? This isn't about assigning blame, but about gaining awareness. Carl Jung teaches us that the bonds we attract reflect deep, often unconscious parts of who we are, what we believe we deserve, and what we still need to heal within ourselves. Relationships work like mirrors. They're not just emotional experiences, but symbolic settings that show us where we still need to grow. When someone betrays us, yes, there is an individual choice, a decision that's their responsibility. But the type of relationship we allow, maintain, or repeat might be linked to internal patterns we haven't yet recognized. Often, people who attract betraying partners share an invisible trait: difficulty in emotionally standing up for themselves. They love deeply, but they stay silent when faced with small signs of disrespect. They give too many chances, ignore discomfort, and justify the unjustifiable. Over time, they create space for unbalanced relationships, where the other feels they can cross boundaries without major consequences. This isn't about blame, it's a pattern. And as Jung would say, these patterns come from the collective unconscious, childhood experiences, and unresolved complexes. A common example is someone who in childhood experienced emotional instability, absent parents, conditional affection, broken promises. Such experiences can lead to a familiarity with pain in adult life. Unconsciously, the person ends up recreating relationships that make them feel that familiar pain, even if it's uncomfortable. That's why sometimes someone repeatedly attracts partners who betray, disappear, or lie. Not because they want it, but because a part of them has learned to associate that kind of relationship with what is normal. The process of individuation, according to Jung, is exactly the way to break these patterns. It means moving away from reactive relationships and building conscious bonds. To do this, you must face the mirror with courage. What is this betrayal trying to show me? When did I silence my intuition? Which part of me still believes it must accept less than it deserves to be loved? Another key point: betrayal can also reveal how you relate to yourself. If you constantly abandon yourself, self-sabotage, criticize, or hide, you might end up attracting people who, unconsciously, replicate that behavior. They don't respect your boundaries because you're still learning how to set them. They vanish because you haven't learned to be present for yourself. Again, it's not your fault, it's a mirror of what's inside. But there's good news in all of this. When you change from within, the mirror changes outside. Healthier relationships begin to form. You start recognizing red flags earlier, and most importantly, you become less vulnerable to idealizations, manipulations, or dynamics where betrayal hides. Jung once said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will find in our destiny." In relationships, this is very true. Until we look at what makes us accept less, what drives us to repeat old patterns, we will keep attracting experiences that force us to learn through pain. But once we begin to see these dynamics, we can choose differently. In this context, betrayal becomes a turning point. It shows that something needs to be re-evaluated, that you can't keep going the same way, and that awakening might be the start of a deep journey of self-discovery, where bonds are chosen with more clarity, strength, and truth. You deserve relationships that reflect your truth, but for that to happen, that truth must be alive within you. And that is the most transformative work there is. After being betrayed, it's common for your heart to build walls. The disappointment is so deep that it seems necessary to protect yourself at all costs. Then comes the idea that it's better not to trust, not to open up, not to love too much. And many people end up living this way, closed off, suspicious, expecting the worst. However, Carl Jung teaches us that true transformation isn't about hardening yourself. It's about integrating, looking at what hurt you, understanding what it reveals, and moving forward with more awareness, not more fear. Breaking the cycle of betrayal requires more than just distancing yourself from certain people. It demands an internal change, moving from merely reacting to pain to consciously choosing a different path. The first step is understanding that you are not the problem, even if you might unknowingly be part of dynamics that foster this kind of bond. Self-awareness becomes the most powerful tool there is. Jung said, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This means that to stop attracting relationships where betrayal repeats itself, you must look within. Where do you still abandon yourself? In what situations do you feel you must remain silent to be accepted? When did you allow too much, even though something felt wrong? Betrayal doesn't happen just because the other person is bad. Sometimes it occurs in relationships where boundaries aren't clear, where the fear of rejection makes someone accept signs of disrespect from the start. Breaking the cycle is above all about learning to say no at the right moment, trusting that doing so won't push true love away, but rather bring it closer. It's also important to understand the difference between protecting yourself and shutting yourself off completely. When you protect yourself consciously, you remain open to love, but with discernment. When you close yourself off out of fear, you end up in shallow relationships where neither person truly connects. It's a natural defense mechanism, but it keeps the pain alive even if it's no longer happening. Another essential aspect of this process is reclaiming your emotional authority. Many who have been betrayed end up internalizing a sense of weakness, feeling they were deceived because they missed the signs or were too naive. But this narrative must be changed. The truth is that trusting isn't weakness, it's courage. The issue isn't in trusting, but in who you choose to trust. That choice changes when you begin to listen to your intuition, notice patterns, and respect your feelings. Betrayal is often accompanied by small red flags, contradictory words, unkept promises, behaviors that don't match the talk. When you are connected with yourself, these signs do not go unnoticed. You feel them, and more importantly, you act. Breaking the cycle also involves forgiving yourself, understanding that, despite everything, you remain worthy of love, respect, and truth. The other's betrayal does not define your value. It only shows where they stopped in their own journey. Meanwhile, you continue on, more lucid, whole, and true to yourself. Ultimately, breaking this cycle is also a choice to keep your heart open, not out of naivety, but as a conscious decision. Growth doesn't happen in rigidity. It happens in being present, in choosing to be whole, even knowing the risks, in deciding to love with open eyes, no longer blindfolded by need or illusion. You can have genuine relationships. You can trust again. You can open up with more wisdom, truth, and maturity. And that possibility doesn't arise when the other changes. It arises when you do. When you understand that you don't need to repeat the same script because you've learned what you needed to. That's where healing happens. When you realize that the pain of betrayal didn't close your heart, it merely prepared the ground for it to beat with greater strength and awareness from now on. Betrayal hurts. It distorts what once felt solid, shakes trust, and even confuses our self-image. But in light of Carl Jung's psychology, we see that it's not just an isolated act. It's a symptom of internal conflicts, unrecognized shadows, unresolved projections, and bonds that often mirror something deeper. Understanding why people betray you isn't about justifying the other's mistake. It's about freeing yourself from the cycle. When you recognize the patterns, strengthen your boundaries, clear your projections, and learn to trust yourself first, the kind of relationships you attract change, and the pain of betrayal loses its power. This journey isn't easy, but it is transformative. And if you've read this far, you're already in motion. Now is the time to go further. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with anyone who needs to see the root of the pain in order to finally break the cycle. And don't forget to watch the video on screen. It's the next step in your journey of self-discovery. You didn't come into this world to be betrayed, you came to be whole.